kids. I found another Craigslist treasure. I'm terrible for buying shit, and I got that for basically a song. So let's get it in here and see if it'll run. Basically what we've got here is what's labeled as an MX12085. A little bit of information that I found on these is I think these winches, and they also made a couple other MX series winches, was them adding these planetary winches to the actual winch line. I may or may not be right on that date, but for some reason they have like this variation of case that's black. They're a little bit different than the other cases. The MX8000 is the same thing. I came across an ad on a Google search, like a Motor Trend ad, and it was listing these as the new for 1985 winch. Okay, so I assume that's why it's called the 12085, because they were from 85. Also on this date line here, I don't know if this will come across or not, but anyway, the date line there you can see it says like LN5, I think, something to that effect. So that 5 is the last year of the date, and since we know this obviously isn't 75, it's 85. This also shows that Warn is in Oregon at this time, so that is also showing that it's like an 80s date. This serial number is actually 9405, so this is early on. And that's what makes me think that this is just the beginning of the planetary line of winches. I don't know, I probably should look it up again. Maybe Warn like sold during that time, changed hands again, and they changed designs or something to that effect. But either way, I think what I'm going to do here real quick is we're just going to pull the cover off. You can see all this looks like pretty clean. That's a little bit rusty, and it looks like it's just primarily surface rust type stuff. So let's get that cover off here real quick and see what's up. The guy said he pulled this off of a tow truck, I think. So anytime you come across these old winches and the plastic solenoid cover is still in good shape, this isn't all cracked and broken up, that's always a good sign. He said somebody robbed the plug in out of it, but that's not a huge deal. Alright, I'm going to actually put this on the floor and blow it out. Let's see if it'll work, okay? So, maybe power. It is pretty crusty. Let's see if we got anything here. Ooh. So yeah, there you have it. Who knows how long that guy was sitting around for, but basically what we'll do is just slower that way for sure, but it's probably dirty. So $150 for that bad boy. Alright, so what I did was put a little bit of this Aerocoil on here. This is some super good shit, allegedly. It's just kind of expensive, so I think probably the next best thing, I don't know why I don't buy it, like PB Blaster is actually pretty good for penetrant lubricant, stuff like that. And then obviously WD-40 for all this other stuff. So like I said, I already had kind of sprayed this down. Really, this is overall not in bad shape at all. I thought one of these tie rods was bent, but it looks like it's not. Very little oxidization. So yeah, should be a nice little cleanup, and then it will be good to go. Got this boot pulled back, a little bit of crustiness on there, so we'll get these all sprayed down, and then like I said, we'll go through it all and make sure that we'll make sure everything's good to go with this. So yeah, sweet little find, and it works, right? And so theoretically, those solenoids up and make them work right. Let's see what this thing weighs. I swear online some of these are like 130, 160 pounds, so basically right at about 108 pounds with the rope on there. 100 pounds isn't terribly unreasonable. .8 is like over 15 pounds with the line off. After the weight, I went ahead and started pulling the solenoid pack off. It's pretty rusty, and the field lugs on here, this lug is really nasty. I don't know what I'm going to do about that. These other two were able to come off, so I want to try hard to save that. All of these motor mount bolts seem like they came off pretty easy. One of these bolts is a little bit stuck, so I think what's going to happen is this faceplate will come off, I'll get the motor off, and then I'll be able to lube the back of the screw and get it out, and then maybe access the other side of this one better so we can get it out without breaking it. So that's what we look like getting the motor pulled off. That's where that bolt is all corroded, all up in there where you can see that. Otherwise not too bad. And then you can see a little bit of grime. You can see the drum, the brake mechanism in there. I don't know if that'll come out or not, but that's what those two pieces look like. Okay, so what we're doing here is, like I said, we are just kind of bathing this hole in lube so we can get that screw out of there. It's not real nasty in there, just primarily a little bit of surface rust. This is where that other screw is, and it came right out. This is your motor hub and your brake drive hex. You can see down in there, but that hex is how you activate the drum brake piece. And see, it looks like this is doing what it's supposed to be doing, because you can see brake doesn't turn that way, it does turn that way. So this would be your spooling up way here, and this is against the spool. So it looks like that's doing what it's supposed to be doing. This appears to be hung up on the splines here a little bit, so I'm going to just, like everything else here, we're just going to work real slow and get that out. All these came out without any problems. A little bit of corrosion, but nothing too bad. All those screws turned out all good, so do that. The crossbars, but yeah, overall she's in good shape. The guy said that they had it for like a spare or something. He said he pulled it off of a tow truck, so I mean, it seems pretty legit, like something's been sitting around for, you know, unfortunately 1985 is almost 40 years ago now. That's just such a crazy thought. Anyway, back to this guy. I'm just going to slowly try to get this hardware out of here, and then we'll come back and start working on the gear end of this, just to kind of make sure that drum brake is in good shape. Is the only reason I want to get in there. It looks like there is this particular gear set, they updated some of the stuff in there, and I don't know, it appears that what went on is the way that this lock collar, notice this one turns all the way around. I don't think that's broken, I just think that's the way that particular collar works. On the other one, I think that handle was like squared off or something in there, so it will only turn like a 180. It doesn't turn 360. But it looks like they updated that clutch collar piece. On this piece is a collar, and there's little ball bearings around that. We'll see that later on, I guess. But on the later stuff, on that M8 that I've got, it's just a slide collar, and then the collar's got a little detent where the handle catches it and moves it back and forth. So I don't know if this is a different design just because of it's the heavyweight style stuff or whatever, and it's not real clear what went on with what exactly got changed. It appears that collar and all that other stuff is incorporated in the new style. I don't know what they call that, the gear cluster end or whatever. So yeah, just a little update on that. So all right, I've just been plugging away here, working on getting this motor disconnected, getting that motor screw out, got the motor end off, and I wasn't sure what I was going to see in here. We've seen a little bit of rust. This thing is almost like new. I mean, those brushes are huge in there still, so There's a little bit of griminess going on in there, but not too bad. This is what the cap looked like. So I don't know if that had moisture in it or what, but I think that was the one side that had the crustiness in it. And so I need to get this collar off so I can get this other piece off. So I guess the next thing I'm going to do is work on getting this collar off. And then we can get this piece off. Then we should be able to maybe service that bolt. So we got the motor and all that stuff pulled off of it. What ended up going on with the motor is one of the field studs was damaged. So I'm going to have to go source another one of those. Shouldn't be a big deal because the motor was running. All the solenoids did check out. So kind of where I'm at here with this is I pulled the brake assembly out of the drum, right? And that is just held in there by, this is what I think is actually called a circlip, a spring circlip. Anyway, it just holds the brake down in there. So that's a little bit different than the early brakes or the brake that you would find like on an M8000, for example, that they tell don't take it apart, but you won't be able to put it back together. It's not really rocket science on that, so you can put those back together. But anyway, where I'm at with this today is I was just going to get into the gearbox, I think, and make sure that it's not all full of mud and rust and shit. And so what ended up happening with the M8, it was really nice and clean. It was just nasty on the outside. So I'm just going to open up the gearbox today. I bought new hardware anyway, so we may as well get that out. And I'm going to end up refreshing this a little bit, but I think I'm just going to keep it black because it's mostly in good shape. So yeah, what I'm going to do here is get this gearbox apart, and more or less this little key is kind of what helps operate the brake. One end of the brake runs into the gearbox and it locks to the case, that's the brake, and the other end goes into the motor. So basically the first step of getting gearbox apart would be, of course, getting this guy out because it's going to fall out of the way anyway. And then it looks a lot like that. So I'm just going to get those out of there and I'll show you what goes on there. I did at one point already go ahead and break these all loose, and they all came out of there nice and easily. I don't think this winch actually saw much use. You can tell by the motor, the brushes are nice and big, clean. It just ended up getting a little bit of corrosion and wasn't working properly, so these guys just didn't mess with it. Or the guy said he had it as a spare. Actually, I think kind of wish I had the M8 right here just so you could see how much different the size is. A lot of what goes on with these motors is a lot of these are powered by the same actual electric motor. So the difference ends up being just what the gear ratio is in the planetary gear set is what gives it the actual pound rating. A lot of these winches are also, again, built on the same chassis. Okay. My last bolt here, and this will get the main planetary off. I want to turn this like this though. How's that? So this is just the other bulkhead end of the winch that the drum runs in. And you can see these aren't waterproof. It actually had a little intrusion right there. But there's what your gear set looks like. Really not bad. This is kind of muddy right there, but that's just a gasket. Alright, so yeah. Anyway, a little bit of mud in there, not a huge deal. And it's not it doesn't really look that nasty, so not a big deal. And this is nice and greasy still, so it's not really all full of crud. And then these interplanetaries are even cleaner. Come off there. Oh. Well, there's the next set. Little snap ring right here I'm gonna have to get out. Okay. This piece out here. Oh no. That's not what I wanted. Balls. Okay then, so that's kind of not where I expected that to go. Damn it. And it sucks because I read about these balls. So apparently this one-way clutches, or this clutch is held on here, there's a bunch of bearings, so that's going to be to go back together. Alrighty then. Yeah. I'm going to dig those balls out of there and then we'll be back. I got all the balls picked up. Basically, the Warn manual says there's 85 balls, 85 balls. I ended up with 89 balls. I had seen these in the manual and I just blew it when I took this apart. This is your free spool, like your free spool lockout. Those balls ride in that groove, okay? That way when it gets load, it's on the ball bearing. It's not just smashing into the case. You can see this line in the case is actually from those bearings. And I noticed it's marked, it's not real smooth, so I'm gonna probably get in there with an emery and clean it off. As of now, what I'm going to do is just take all these parts, or take the planetary gears, and I'm going to soak them. I've been cleaning parts in kerosene because that's kind of all I've got. I don't have a parts cleaner, and that's too expensive to do that yet, but that's what I've got. So these are going to soak for a couple days, and then it will be ready to start going back together. I'm going to do a little paint work, I think, on this, but like I said, we're just going to hit it satin black and knock it back down again. Drum obviously needs to be sanded up and cleaned up, and the solenoid plate. But this one actually came with the good cover, a cover that's not smashed, right? It's still 40 years old or whatever, but it ended up, I think I showed you this guy before. Pretty sweet, little OG cover to cleaning. Okay, so I can show how this assembles, I guess here, right? So all of your gear set starts with the sun gear. You can see that's got the hex because, like I said, it hooks into that bar from the brake in the motor. That sun gear sits right down there on that plug where this gear set sits on top of it. The sun gear goes into that little hole there, okay? This sits down into the slot. That, and it will be driven around the case by the sun gear through that shaft. After that, this is where your collar would go in. The free spool hub goes like that. You lock out through this hole here. Then this gear set engages the collar and that other gear set. Like that. That sits down like that. After that, this big old mold gets on there. Smash my fingers like that. And then after that, the other case piece goes on there. So that's how it stacks. The fun part will be sticking all those bearings to that other collar when it gets reassembled, so I'll make sure to let you watch that one. Okay, so as per the usual, I left out the boring stuff. You saw me tear this down, and then I just cleaned up and started putting paint on this. I was originally going to do this hammered and go back to like a Warn kind of style gray, but I don't know. I guess I sort of just kind of brain farted halfway through and I went back to black. So everything will be satin black. I guess that's what color this is. Oh, God. What are we going to be? Apparently it's going to be half and half because I consistently buy 2 different styles of paint. God. All right, well, I guess we're going to see what this looks like when it dries out, because I think I got everything colored in the same thing. I guess I've only been using this one can, though. So. Because it's not satin, it is semi-gloss black. Semi-gloss black. So, it looks pretty all right. I couldn't really, I didn't save the end sticker on this guy because it was just shitty and coming off. I tried to save the label sticker on the side of this guy and the disengagement on that guy. And then otherwise, what I did end up doing was I just hit this with a wire wheel. It polished up pretty good. And I also did modify the detents in this. From the factory, they were lame, and this thing just like spun around and around. So I spent a little time kind of drilling those out and making sure it would only run like, do a 180 like it should. During that time period, I managed to damage the original detent spring. So I went and got a new one. Obviously it's not the right size. Like I said, I don't understand what's wrong with everybody anymore. It seems like there's nothing in stock anywhere. So these guys had, I don't know how many drawers. There was like 10 or 15 drawers of random springs there, and there were like 3 in this size, and they were all this length. So not a big deal. I can just cut this one down so it's the right size and make it work. Got new wire hardware. We have all the assembly hardware. So basically what's going to go on is I'm going to let this dry. It's going to go back together. You saw that I got the armature, or that other field stud. So I think I basically will have everything to make this guy run once it goes back together. So I will show you that next. And we're back. So back on the winch deal. I'm getting ready to reassemble. All the paint stuff is done, and all the cleaning, all the paint. So we're gonna go ahead and start reassembling the winch today. All the parts are all nice and shiny black. Yeah, and kind of the story of my life, I bought this hammered gray paint. I was gonna do this up in that color to kind of go back to the worn gray or whatever. And then I just started spraying everything black. I just kind of spaced out. So the new bars and the solenoid cover got the gray. I need to get some new ring clamps. That's the one thing I did space out on. So new bars, cover, all the parts are ready to go. So we're going to start I'm going to unmask all this stuff, and then I'm going to go ahead and start assembling it. And that will start with getting the brake back into the drum into the centers, and so on and so forth is how that's going to go. So yeah, here we go. So everything is unmasked. We're ready to start going back together. The first step is getting the brake into the drum. This brake is kind of interesting. It's quite a bit beefier, and it's similar yet different design to what they're putting in like the M8s and some of the other winches. I'm not sure if the late model M12s are using this style of brake or not, but anyway, this is your brake cam device, and then it has got 2 brake pads. They go at either end of the guy like this, okay? And like all brakes, they just kind of work off of, this is like more of a one-way bearing. The other one is just using a ramp to cam the brake out into the deal. And this one actually has got what appears to be a cam right here, but this is also a one-way clutch in here. It's kind of like a dual acting brake, I guess. And then it sits down in the bottom of the drum, and it uses this thrust bearing and plate, and then this circlip snaps down and holds all that in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and reassemble the drum, reassemble the brake, and then we'll get it going back into the drum. All right, nothing actually tricky there. Just go ahead and push that circlip down in there and it falls into the ring. Then you just want to verify that that drum is down. That is the brake install. Well, that went pretty easy. I had that out of there because it like had melted grease and it had just kind of been corrupted with some grease that shouldn't have been in there. So clean that out and we'll move on to the next step. So this bushing, this installs like this with this little edge goes exposed to the outside of the deal. So the next piece is we will assemble these to the drum like this. I'm going to lube that bushing a little bit, and then we'll have this center piece. Once we assemble the drum supports, these are both the drum supports, go on, we'll get the crossbars in, and then this will be ready to go. Then we can start building the gear pack on top of it. So as these go together, there's a bushing inside here, another little plastic bush. I'm just going to put a light coat of lube on there, and then these will go together like that. So this is primarily where the drum is riding, so you just want to kind of keep that smooth and clean. On the 8274 winch, the idler end of that, that's what this is called, it will seize up, or it can potentially seize up, but even if it doesn't seize up, it will get dry in there, and then it will make free spooling your winch really suck. So this is the motor end. It's got the smaller pattern right here, and we know it's the motor end because this is the motor drive, and it will stick out like that, or at that end. This is actually in here backwards. This goes like this. Dope. Kind of a good example of what goes on with this. I mean, a lot of people it's probably pretty obvious. All these winch bodies are made out of like aluminum alloy or something like that. So you can see this has got oxide on the back of it. Didn't get totally cleaned off. Anyway, what goes on with that is when you have steel and aluminum, they're both trying to oxide. Okay, steel oxide is rust. Aluminum oxide is aluminum oxide, or you know, whatever. You want to make sure that's clean, and putting a little bit of grease in there will keep those two surfaces from corroding and then getting stuck on each other. So that's essentially what we're doing, and you don't need to be heavy with it. Like I said, these winches unfortunately aren't waterproof, and you know, like anything else, if it takes a water bath, you should probably service it. Okay, so people are going to bitch and piss and moan about their winches not working after they've been sitting for like 10 years. Okay, so that's not something I have that much sympathy about. You need to make sure that they work. You should probably exercise them once a year at least, depending on where you're at. If you're using the shit out of them, then it's not as big of a deal, but all right. So now we can get the crossbars in. So these crossbars are apparently unique to this style of a winch. All the later model stuff is using an aluminum strut. These are called a strut or a tie rod. So the original ones came out like this. They were pretty rusty, and I managed to break the ends off a couple of them. Considering the new style isn't bolted into this particular winch, and they're aluminum, and they're, in my opinion, just way too expensive for what you actually get, I went ahead and bought some steel. This is just 5/8 rod, and then we turned them down and tapped them to 3/8, right? These will just go in here like that. So we're gonna get those in now. So So those don't need to be super duper tight because you'll break the aluminum. Make sure that drum still turns in there good like it should. This ended up being a little bit tall, so I ended up leaving these long. I didn't kind of go where I wanted to go with them necessarily, and the pieces were longer. So I figured you could probably use these like as a light tab if you wanted. Put a light on here. Be good to go. Okay, so this is your gear box, planetary gear box. You see that little line in there? So it's a little wear mark in there. That's caused by the bearings that ride in that little slot. So I'm just gonna rough that out of there real quick and get it cleaned up so it's nice and smooth for the ball bearings to roll in. And that doesn't want to come all the way out of there. Probably not a huge deal as it turns out. I'll just make sure that it's nice and smooth and those bearings can roll in there. I almost wonder if that isn't like a little bit of pitting from just sitting for a long time. I'm gonna go ahead and get these balls cleaned off and make sure they're not all weird, but yeah, anyway, that's what we're gonna do right there. I'm gonna start putting the gears back in together now. So now we're gonna go ahead and start assembling the gearbox. I got this pretty well cleaned up. It's not perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better than it was. So we're gonna start assembling the gears. This is the super special lube. Basically what will go on is we're gonna start with sun gear here. This has got a little bit of a tall side, you can see, so this will go down, actually go up into the bottom of the gear set. So I'm gonna go ahead and lube these gears up and drop them into the planetary box. All right, so the second set of gears is put inside. So now what we need to do is install the free spool piece, right? So this goes down on top like this, but before that goes in there, all of these balls go in this edge here. So I'm gonna go ahead and glue all those in there and we'll get it installed down into here. Okay, so putting these ball bearings back in this little collar turned out to be a little more challenging than I anticipated. I just straight up didn't record me blowing it the first time, but what was going on is I'm able to get most of them in there, then it starts melting the grease, and then they start falling back out of the deal here. So I took it upstairs and I put it in the freezer. Now I'm gonna get the rest of the balls put in there and get it put into this, put it in its home. So maybe I'm gonna get all the balls put in here. I've been fighting with this magnet and these balls falling out of here, but I think I got it now. I should be able to just real fast get the rest of these balls in. This one ball fell out. Where do you go? All right. There's that guy. Now, I'll grease up the inside of this guy here a little bit. All right, so I guess just freeze this. You may have to take 2 tries at it just because of the way things go at that, or stick your grease or whatever, but all right, so the next piece we're gonna put in is gonna be this free spool knob. This just goes into the hole like this. When I originally bought this thing, because of the way this thing was built, this free spool knob didn't really have a detent. There was a detent in there, but it wasn't working. So I modified that handle a little bit to actually make it work. So it takes a 1/4 inch ball, goes down in the hole, and then I had to get a new spring because I damaged the other one. I still need to cut that down a little bit. So the spring goes in the hole, then this detent goes in the hole, and then that's all held down by this guy here as it goes on top. So this would spin around before. This held down, we got a nice lock here and a nice stop here. So it's only got 180 degrees, and that's the way it should be. So I'm gonna get some glue, get that guy on there, and then we'll get it onto the actual winch itself. So when dealing with something like this, these kind of have like a clocking that goes on here, and these are able to, typically they'll clock and then 2 spots and clock, 2 spots and clock. But we have in this situation where we're gonna have a match mark between this guy and this guy right here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna glue this to this piece, and then I'm gonna take this piece and put it on that piece. That way I don't have to worry about that gear and all that stuff spilling out of there. So that's what we're gonna do here now. This ring, I forgot, goes in the hole to hold the free spool piece back down in there. So go ahead and get the spring snap down in there, and then we'll be ready to go again. And so I'm using sealant here just for the sake of waterproofing, but also for the sake of, again, like I mentioned before, I appreciate Warn making parts for some of these. Some of their parts are a little expensive, and I can't see paying an ass load for like paper gaskets. That seems silly. So, and then all we're doing here is making like a nice thin, just want to make a nice thin gasket here. And the paint is on here pretty thick too, so that will kind of act as a little bit of a sealer also. And being careful not to get it stuck in this detent. We don't want that detent to stick down. I guess it won't matter that much really, but so just thin layer like that. And then lays down like that. Come on. All right, let me make sure that we're lined up in the right screw hole there. And we are. That's down all right, good. So now what we need to do is get this last set of planetaries in, this big old bad boy right here. And again, you just want to get a quick inspect, make sure they're not foobarred. Then you want to grease these up here. I said, like, you want to get these covered, but you don't need to get too crazy, because the more grease you get in here, it will kind of cause these to gum up. Then they're not going to want to free spool and do all those things that make your life easier with a winch. Not having a working free spool is definitely a pain. So you want to make sure that you do have a working free spool. A lot of people say that when you have to power out, it's running on the brake, and the brake can heat up the drum and all this other stuff. I'd be interested in actual research on that. I think that's kind of nonsense. Not only that, I don't know what you'd be doing winching out for extended periods of time if you weren't like trying to use like as a hoist or something like that. So I just have this suspicion where if you're having that kind of scenario going on, you're probably not using your winch right. But I don't know. I'm sure there's a this and that for everything, right? And I just kind of cover these cases just for the sake of corrosion. You don't want any rust getting in there and growing for no reason. So just put a light coat of grease on everything. All right, and this goes in here because this goes to the drum side. So shit. Let me make this go down. Divers go down. All right, so you just want that other gear set sit down in there like that. And then again, you want to clean the surface off here so we can start going back to the winch. So I'm going to get this cleaned off. Just use that guy as a locator. You see that? Use that as a locator. Again, just want to put a light coat of silicone on here. All right, so that gearbox side is done. Now I'm going to get the armature and stuff back in the motor, get the motor to the plate, plate to the winch. All right, so at this point, the gearbox is done. Everything is done with that. You're gonna wanna take this drive spline. This is the motor spline. This goes down in there and the other end of the brake. Okay, just like that. The next piece that will go on is this guy here. Figure out where that guy goes. And then the motor's ready to go on. And then we're gonna be ready to try to run this thing here pretty quick. So let's get the motor on. Okay, so I went ahead and clocked this motor plate. Got it on here, ready to go. Got it glued on. I'll get the hardware in here. Going through this winch, I can tell kind of why they revised it and did some things a little bit differently. For example, these plates like aren't doubled up on the other one. The motor just bolts to this drum support. So I'm not, like I said, I gotta kind of quit asking myself why people do things the way that they did. So when I talked about this before, but I believe that this MX series of motor was Warn's like kind of first try at the planetary winches. This kind of came out during the mid 80s, and really up until that point you just had Warn's 8274. Ramsey had some winches out, but primarily as far as the electric went, you had the 8274, like some Ramsey stuff or some like PTO stuff. So what these winches did is they kind of opened up the market to still be able to have a winch on your vehicle without it taking up so much real estate. And I'm sure the manufacturer of these is probably a little bit cheaper than the 8274 as well. And what Warn ended up doing with a lot of these winches is you kind of have, Warn's got a couple size winches. You've got like the standard size winch, which is going to be like your M8, your 9, 9500. All of those are kind of built primarily on the same chassis. And then the heavier winches, I'm not 100% prior. Everything from 10K up, 10, 12, 15, 16 are all going to be like on their big boy heavyweight winches. So one thing I did notice is during this particular era, Warn built these. They built this. I'm pretty sure they had a 10K. They had an MX8. They have this MX12085. They had another one that's an 8,000 pound winch. Can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it's an 8,000 pound winch, but it's on the large chassis. I don't know why they would do that, but they did. So anyway, God, silicone everywhere. So now this is what will be going forward. I put this on here because there's a drain that goes down, so you want to be able to drain the motor away. Okay, so time for a test go here. I'm not going to bother with doing the solenoid right now or whatever. I just want to make sure that the motor works. So we got our all set up, wired up to the battery, and then essentially the way these motors work is power runs into the motor through here, through the magnets, comes out this other field winding, back through the armature winding, and then out the ground. Okay, so we have a power and a ground. All we need to do is complete this circuit here. Run it that way. She goes both ways, so this rebuild is done. Yeah.
That wraps up another episode of Snale Racing.
Thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe.